This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special return guest to the podcast today. He's one of my favorite people on the planet, and that is Chad Robichaux. So this is his fourth appearance on this show. He is a retired Force Recon Marine. He's an Afghanistan combat veteran, former pro MMA champion, fourth degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I think I introduced him as a third degree last time, so he beat me up for that. Best-selling author, speaker, founder of Mighty Oaks Foundation, founder of Save Our Allies. This is his fourth appearance, but it's also technically like his seventh, because one thing that you'll see here in a bit, we had more tech snafus on this particular podcast than we've ever had on any other podcast. We had the internet not just go down in my house during one of the interviews, it went down the entire neighborhood. And then for the second interview, we had issues with like phone connections and Wi-Fi and blah, 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 and all that. And so there was a lot. My wife even texted me at one point. She's like, I'm wondering if you're not supposed to put this interview out for whatever reason. But I'm like, I feel like when you're over the X on a particular topic, that Satan and all those dark forces and maybe even the deep state are going to push back on it. So it's very, very important that we get this information out, because we're talking about his new book today. And here I go. I get a major frog in my throat when I'm trying to talk about his new book. Satan, you are working overtime, but we're going to push through. A Mission Without Borders, Why a Father and Son Risked It All for the People of Ukraine. And so what's interesting about this right from the beginning is you might be thinking, oh, Ukraine book, because I know a lot of people, especially in the conservative space, were like, we're over hearing about Ukraine. That's not our conflict. That's not our war. Why are we sending them billions and billions of dollars? And so I asked them about that right from the beginning, like, Chad, how are you going to get, like, you just got through getting, into this conflict over in Afghanistan, and now you're putting yourself in Ukraine, like days before the invasion of the Russians. Like, what exactly are you doing all this for? And so we get into all of that information, but then we talk about, okay, how is it possible that you end up there, but then you end up bringing your eldest son to be part of a mission where there's a lot of kinetic things that are happening and where you're not going to be able to keep him safe the entire time? And so for those of you with sons, that interesting bond between a father and son that are both, there's no such thing as a former Marine, but both retired Marines that have been in some kinetic situations. You want to be dad, but you also want to be operator. So how exactly do you do that? But then we just talk openly about the war, about the conflict. What are we seeing? How could this end? What could Putin do? But then we detail some of the atrocities that he saw with his own eyes. Okay. It's one thing to report that you've seen something that you just saw from a picture of a picture and you can't really confirm where it was or when it was taken. But Chad himself saw mass graves that were full of only women and children. Let me repeat that. Chad and his team came upon graves that were full of hundreds and hundreds of women and children, not combatants. We have Russian kill squads going into civilian areas where they know the men aren't, because the men are on the front lines fighting somewhere, and they're going through and systematically killing the women and children and the elderly. That's the conflict that's happening right now. And so we get into those details. We talk about kind of where this is going from here. We also talk about some of the gangster Ukrainian pastors that are part of this conflict. And so there's a whole lot that we covered here. Again, sorry about the different cuts. It's not going to be as bad for those of you in audio land, but those of you watching on YouTube or Rumble, it's going to be a little bit of a rough one. We're getting 3 different qualities of video and 3 different audios or whatever. So shout out to our boy Landon, who's going to be, putting all this together. So if it ends up seeming good on the back end, you can thank Landon, our editor, for doing that. But guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Chad Robichaux, this is your fourth appearance on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. And typically when someone makes like third, fourth, fifth appearances on the show, I'm like, hey, how's that feel? Doesn't that make you feel good? But I got to tell you, I'm still a little pissed off at you, because the last time I saw you in person, I was in Houston, and you invited me over to your house, which I thought you were just being hospitable. But then as soon as we got there, you're like, by the way, Kyle, I think we need to cook you like a brisket. And so you put me in a, what's that thing called? Where you be put with a
human oven? It's a sauna.
Yeah. You put me in the sauna. Okay. But you put me at 190 degrees for like 20 minutes. And, everything you read is like, yeah, you probably shouldn't go that hot right from the beginning, but you're like, screw that. Let's do it. And then you just couldn't leave me alone. You're like, no. As soon as you get out of that, you need to hop in this cold tub that's at like 45 degrees. And so, Chad, I thought we were friends. I thought we had an understanding. Like, that stuff's not fun for me, and I don't just have that available to me at my house. What is your problem?
Well, you were whining about the heat, so I had to cool you off. And
okay. I'm a ginger. I'm like sensitive to heat. I don't have like a lot of barriers in my skin. The sun is always out to get me. Like I will say, I did bring this on myself. I know I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but I had never done sauna before, and I had never done cold plunge, and I'd certainly never done them back to back. It seemed awesome. I didn't really get the benefits of doing it one time, but it was pretty cool.
You gonna do more?
I want to. I got a buddy, Chad, that I need to introduce you to. His name's Mike Dragich. He does some stuff for a cooler company, and I'm not going to name them because they're not sponsoring this show, so they're not going to get a shout out from me, but they make these enormous, like people-sized coolers, and he's a gator hunter, and so he'll go out there and, he needs a cooler to put these huge gators in. And so he actually got a little thing to turn this enormous, like, hunting cooler into a cold plunge. And so I'm like, okay, that's actually pretty interesting doing something like that. And then there, some different sauna options, but yeah, eventually that should be a staple of the home gym. Cause like this morning I got home from a long ruck, and I would have loved to have been able to chuck the ruck and then just go sit in the sauna for, 20 more minutes or something before I go shower, just kind of keep everything going. So that would have been cool to do. So I definitely want to do it some more. Are you still doing it often?
Yeah, I like to sauna and cold plunge. I do them together. Sauna first, obviously. Cold plunge, you want to end on the cold plunge and let your body warm itself back up. You don't want to end on warmth. So I usually end with it and get out. If I'm in it for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever I'm in it, I kind of stand on outside, let my body acclimate back, and have that to call the where your body does the drop, where it drops back even colder after you get out because of just staying there. And then I'll let my body have like a whole hour to warm itself back up before I do anything like a shower or anything. So that's I think I heard at several places they had a guest on Huberman that really talked a lot about it. And so, but I try to do it at least like anywhere from 4 to 5 times a week. That's, and I feel great. Like, honestly, I was doing it after working out, but what I started doing for jiu-jitsu is I'll just do the plunge by itself sometimes, maybe like just like 1 or 2 minutes before jiu-jitsu. And I feel amazing. It's better than stretching. It's better than anything else. When I get in there, my mind feels sharp. My body feels good. So I'll just do it like right before jiu-jitsu. And my friend Rob Johnson and Mountain Tribe Jiu-Jitsu in Prescott, Arizona, he does it every time. His like part of his ritual before jiu-jitsu, he'll plunge right before, and talks about how his body ached through jiu-jitsu all this time, and now he's just feeling amazing.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of anybody doing that. So Chad, I'm sold. So you can just, whatever you set up in your backyard, just go ahead and ship me one. I'll set it up myself out here. It's all good to go. Like, I really, really appreciate it. You're a very, very generous person. But speaking of jiu-jitsu, the last time I was out there as well, we didn't get to roll because you just got your toenails removed. So you're going to have to explain this to our audience, because like you tried to convince me that this was like a jiu-jitsu thing, but I've never heard of a single person in the jiu-jitsu world other than you, but you're a 4th degree black belt, so you're a different kind of animal that got your toenails removed. So help me understand what happened here.
Well, I didn't just get removed, they're permanently removed. And it's not a thing. A lot of wrestlers, I think a lot of judo guys, and I've seen some jiu-jitsu guys get them permanently removed. I've been grappling for 43 years. And so a lot of trauma on your nails and toes, and broken my toes a lot. And then my toes got big toenails got to where they were not sticking to the nail bed. So now you get like nasty fungus under them, and you're always like trying to take care of that. And then they'll snag on the mats. I've had my toenails ripped off a couple of times on the mats. And so last time my toenail got ripped off, I'm like, I'm getting these things permanently removed. And so I went in, and they actually, they remove it like they normally remove it. And they give all those super painful shots in the nerves. But then they go back about an inch and a half, like 2 inches past the nail bed, which is crazy. And they carve out kind of a slot where the nail would grow, because the nail grows way back in the toe. And then they take like some acid and they put it in the nail bed and kill the bed, so your toenail never grows back. And it was actually sounded like a good idea, but it was probably one of the more painful things I've ever done. And it wasn't over in I was like, I'll be training back in a day, 2 days. It was like a month of just, and it scabbed over. And then my baby dropped her sippy cup full of water right on it, busted it open. It was actually pretty terrible. But now that that it's healed up, it's pretty nice, and my feet look a lot better. I'm not a foot model or anything.
Okay,
but look, those big nasty toenails always falling off, and yeah.
Yeah, that looked pretty funky. I will say this though, Chad, I have been very careful since I started the show back in 2017 to do everything I can to be a walking commercial for jiu-jitsu because of the tremendous benefits that people can get from it. I've been on this journey for 7 years, 4-stripe purple belt, just training as much as I can while keeping the body safe. But when people hear stuff like that, like your toenails might have to be permanently removed, they're not going to want to train, Chad.
Yeah. I mean, my body's been through it, man. Lost my toenails, broke my teeth out. Got a nice new smile from courtesy of my friends here, Guy Lewis in Texas, and fixed my teeth and my ears. Got a bunch of broken bones but man, I got great people to keep me going. I go down. One of the things that really have helped me, I think you do BioPro too, or I gave you some BioPro. That's like been really great.
We talked about it.
Yeah, and then I go. This is my second trip going on a Accelerator in Colombia for the stem cell therapy. And man, look, I'm not plugging any. This is like life. That was like life changing for me going down there, and I'll be going down there every year. It's incredible. The guys out of Accelerator in Colombia. It should be a crime that they don't allow this level of treatment in the United States. I mean, the Accelerator is actually an American company out of Scottsdale, but because of the FDA and Big Pharma, they have to do the treatment down in Medellin, Colombia.
Right.
I walked away from there like I've had stem cell and PRP and all the stuff here in the States, and I'm like, did it work? Didn't it work? I went down there and literally like I was like, a miracle just happened. Like it was incredible. So I'll be going back here soon. I was just talking to Mick Maynard, vice president of the UFC. A lot of UFC fighters go down to Accelerator. I think Joe Rogan's talked a lot about Accelerator.
Right.
And they just added me to the board for the athlete board. So myself, Chuck Liddell, Tony Hawk is on the board there.
Nice.
And so we kind of help get in folks that help get athletes in, but we also are, one of our jobs on the board is to make sure that military and first responders that are banged up and couldn't afford that level of treatment get down there for free, and Accelerator pays for all their treatment, which they paid for mine. So it's incredible. And it's super cool that they do that.
Yeah, I've heard about a lot of people that have gone down to there and gotten a similar experience. So hopefully we can catch up. I know some organizations, even personally, that are working to get some of those things caught up here in America. So that stuff can be, because for a lot of people, traveling out of the country, that's not just something that they can easily do with a family, with a business, with a job, any of those types of things. And so, it's a complicating thing. And before we get into, the main reason for having you on the show, which is another book that you have coming out here soon, I want to ask you about your read about really the complicated time period that we're living in right now in this country. And so again, this will be coming out in a few weeks, when the new book comes out and all that. And so if we know anything about the news cycle, everything can change, because it literally in a week and a half span, we went from the leading candidate to be the next president of the United States, having his head turned into a canoe by millimeters. And then the current president of the United States dropping out of the race, not seeking re-election, but retaining his position as president. And then we see his vice president basically handpicked without a single vote being cast for her to be representing the country. And then now there's all this rehashing of her past. No, she was never the border czar, and no, she never said this, and no, she was never the most liberal person in Congress. And everything that you thought about her 2 weeks ago was false, but now she's one of the most incredible and incendiary and inspirational candidates in modern political history. What is your read about what happens in November, Chad? And I don't mean, polling and who's going to win the presidency necessarily. I'm afraid that no matter what happens, the country burns. Because if Donald Trump loses with all this momentum and with almost being killed, I think that there are going to be a lot of right-wing people that are going to be so incredibly mad that we might see some terrible things happen. Now, obviously, that's not indicative of the right nearly as much as it is of the left, because as I've talked about before, I was in Austin, Texas, the week of the election in 2020, and every single store was boarded up and people were shocked. They're like, I wonder why this is happening. They're like, just in case Trump wins, not because just in case Biden wins. So if Trump does win, you've got Antifa, you've got Hamas sympathizers here in this country. You've got a lot of people that are ready to go, and they're well funded to destroy this country from the inside out. So what is your read about what we have in store for us later this year?
Well, I'll first, you asked a couple of things there. First thing I'll say is, Kamala Harris is, and I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm not saying this partisan in any way. She is one of the dumbest people like ever to serve in U.S. politics. I mean, that's a lot, and that's a lot. There's a lot of dumb people. It sounds like I'm being mean, but it's appropriate to say because we're talking about her being the leader of the free world. She is not an intelligent person. She's not a good person. She's never led anything, and she's has been the worst polled, like least popular vice president in American history. She only took 3% of the Democratic, I think less than 3% of the Democratic vote when she was trying to become president, and she's been thrusted in this position by bypassing the democratic process. I mean, we're not talking about like giving her a shot. This is the leader of the free world. So you have to call it for what it is. She is not in any way whatsoever qualified for the position. Anybody, right, left, Republican, Democrat, conservative, or liberal, thinks or suggests that she's the right person for the job to be the president of the United States is insane. I can't even have a conversation with that because it's not even a rational conversation. I mean, so that's one thing. The other thing about the country burning down if President Trump gets in office, we'll go back. I'll say if President Trump doesn't get in office, I don't think you just see the right wing people rising up. I think you see patriots from both sides rising up. I mean, this is what we've seen. We've seen people who were radical left standing up about the assassination attempt. You see Mark Zuckerberg saying, "Man, when Donald Trump pumped his fist, that was the most badass thing I ever saw." And I get why people like him. You have George Clooney turning on Biden. You have all these people, and I mean, you had people on CNN. You have AOC. I never thought in a million years that I'd give AOC props. You have AOC calling out the director of the Secret Service, telling her to resign. Like, so I don't think you just see if President Trump loses the far right. I think you see patriots from both sides of the aisle saying, "Hey, I might not like Donald Trump, but this is not the America I want to live in, where the American people have lost their electorate ability to vote for who their president is." And I think that's what we're going to see. If President Trump wins, I don't think you see the divide that we've seen, because what we've seen with the assassination attempt, one of the silver linings in it is we've seen the guy that for 9 years, everyone on the left, every mainstream media outlet says he's divisive, he's inflammatory, all these things they said about him. In one moment, he had the chance to be the most divisive and inflammatory politician in 40 years. He had a chance to rile up the right and say, they tried to kill me. They're trying to steal the democratic process. In the deep state did this. The left did this. He could have used that moment to rile up the nation and divide and inflame. And the person that they said didn't. He used that moment to say, "Hey, they tried to kill me, but I am going to be here as the president for all Americans." And he used that moment to bring everyone together. The most inflammatory, right, divisive person used that moment to bring everybody together. And Tucker Carlson said this. I don't know if any other politician would have done that. I don't know if any other politician wouldn't have played that up and said, made themselves a victim, used it as a campaign thing. He didn't. He used it to bring people together. And I think people on both sides the aisle, in the left, respected Donald Trump for that, and he won a lot of people over. And you have BLM right now that's speaking against Kamala Harris. I mean, look, if they're speaking against Kamala Harris, they might not be casting a vote for Trump, but I don't know if they could be burning down buildings over Trump.
Yeah, I think their propensity for burning down buildings is pretty high regardless. And so I'm obviously concerned, and that's a message to everybody that's listening to this, is you got to make sure that you're ready, because make sure you're ready for any contingency that might come, especially if you live in a downtown area or you live in a place that is highly populated by people that are very pro doing things like everything that we saw in the year that we saw in 2020 during the George Floyd riots. So worst transition of all time.
Be ready.
Go ahead.
I agree with that, by the way. You got to be ready. But the reason I'm saying what I'm saying is both sides now, America is tired of this. They're tired of I have people on the liberal side that are just, they're exhausted. And they don't want any of this anymore. And people are seeing this assassination attempt in some of the mainstream media. People are just like, they want to see unity and they want to see peace. And man, look, first time ever, I think Donald Trump has won a lot of people over, and maybe they won't be fans, but I think people will be. I think people will be more accepting on the left. I think people have seen behind the curtain, and I believe, and this is my personal belief, that you can't. Who said this? I forget the guy from Europe's name. That kind of male influencer guy. I forget his name. I like some of the stuff he says, and I don't like those stuff. What's the guy's name? He's got a ball.
Andrew Tate.
Andrew Tate. He said this.
Yeah.
He said you can't kill a man that God wants alive, and that bullet. And the people that was involved and implicated, the complicit people that was involved in trying to kill, he should have been killed. From a strategic standpoint, they should have got him. And the only reason they didn't, I'm convinced of this, it was divine. God, I believe God spared Donald Trump's life that way. And when God intervenes in something like that, I have to believe it's for a reason. And I believe we're going to see. Maybe I'm optimist. I believe we're going to see peace and unity come out of this. I believe Donald Trump's going to win the election, and we're going to see a uniting of America for a season that we hadn't seen in a long time. That's my belief.
That is certainly an optimistic viewpoint. The perennial pessimist that I am, I have a hard time with that, but I would love to see peace and unity. And part of the reason why you're on today is because there's not peace and unity in a lot of places in the world. And specifically, we're seeing that in Ukraine, because you have a new book out right now called A Mission Without Borders, why a father and son, why a father and son risked it all for the people of Ukraine. And the great thing about this book that I have in my hand, Chad, is I got my hard copy of this book before you did. You're a loser. Even your publisher likes me more than they like you, Chad. How's that feel? How's it feel, buddy?
Well, I got the bone to pick with Thomas Nelson. I
got two of them. I didn't even need two of them, but look at these. I got two of them, Chad. What am I supposed to do with two of them?
Days before me, I got this last night, and I went out I went out somewhere with my wife, and I said, I want you to have the very first copy. And I gave that to my wife with a sincere heart, that I gave her the very first copy. And you know what? Now I got to go back and tell my wife that she didn't get the first copy that Kyle Thompson did.
Mrs. Robichaux, you are on the outside looking in. I am the number one person here. I am the captain now. But here's the deal. You go from meddling in crap that was going on in Afghanistan that you probably shouldn't have been meddling in, to going and meddling in crap going on in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. And I was going to ask you, why are you meddling in a new place? But I know the answer. The answer is Sarah Verardo. Okay. So anyone who doesn't know who that is, she's been on the show before. Just go and search for her in our, podcast feed or whatever. But she runs Save Our Allies and a bunch of other different things. But from how I heard the story goes, she basically called you and said, Chad, you're going to Ukraine. And then you're like, okay, Mrs. Verardo. So tell me about this whole idea, how you ended up getting involved in what was going on the ground in Ukraine, actually before Russia had even invaded.
Yeah. I mean, Sarah's on top of a lot of stuff, and it's a big part of why I got involved in Ukraine, of her making that phone call. But when you talk about like meddling in Afghanistan, meddling in Ukraine, the reason why, Sarah and myself and others and NGOs outside of my network have to meddle is because our government won't do the right thing. And when the governments of the world, especially our own, does not do the right thing, then good people have to stand up and do the right thing in their absence. And that's what this is about. I mean, one of the organization that I chair the board of right now is called the Fourth Option. And that's where we do a lot of rescue stuff from. And to give you a little background about the name, is when the United States government has an American or someone of interest that we want to help in a combat zone or a hostile area, there's three options. There's diplomacy, there's military action, and the third is covert action, like a Central Intelligence Agency, some other intelligence agency. And a fourth option would be outside of the government as a surrogate to either support the United States government or work in place of the United States government. That's the fourth option, an unconnected surrogate for the United States government or working in place of. And so the decisions that we make to do these things are always come behind that thing. Can the United States government do it, or will they do it, right? If they can do it and they won't, then we will step in. If they can't do it, for whatever reason, and sometimes there's reasons they can't do it, then we step in. So I don't jump into things that the United States government can do. That's one of the real important things, because a lot of NGOs are like opportunists, and I'm not speaking bad of them, but a lot of, especially guys from my community, they're opportunists. They see the next thing, I got to get into that. And we always, as much as we want to get into things, we don't always do that. We look at a situation and say, can the United States government do it? Yes. Or are they doing it? Yes or no. And that's how there's criteria. And then we actually deconflict. We have a lot of relationships with the Pentagon, JSOC, and those relationships. We want to make sure, because I don't want to go into a building to rescue an American and not know that Delta Force is about to hit there at the same time. We interfere. So we want to deconflict. And so those are some important things that I want people to know, because as we do these things, especially like Afghanistan, Ukraine, it's very important to know that we're not getting in the way of the military. We're not impeding them. We're deconflicting, and we're only doing things that we have to do because our government is either chosen not to do the right thing, or they can't for whatever reasons. And so when Putin put 100,000 troops on the eastern Ukraine border, there was a decision to be made by the White House, and that falls on the President of the United States, how to respond to an ally. Ukraine would have been considered an ally at that time. How do we, whether they are or not, they would have been considered by the United States to be an ally. How do we respond to that? And President Biden made a decision. His decision was to remove U.S. troops out of Ukraine and to close our embassy and our consulate and remove our diplomatic position there. That's a very big decision, by the way, because when you do that, as the President of the United States, all the other NATO countries are going to follow suit. It's just how it works, right? So now you have the deterrent, which is U.S. military and consulate there. And the reason that's a big deterrent for Putin is because of something called the Article 5 violation. There's a thing of all of NATO called the Article 5 violation. If someone even indiscriminately, accidentally wounds a NATO service member, then Article 5 is enacted, and NATO has to respond in military force. And so Putin he's evil. He's crazy, but he's not a stupid man. And so he would have flexed on that border to see how we would respond. And Joe Biden made the decision to pull our troops out. When he did, close our embassy, moved out military and diplomatic assets out, and moved our covert assets out, emptied the country of any U.S. presence. NATO followed suit. It gave a green light for Putin to cross that border. And then the White House followed by commanding the U.S. military and our intelligence agencies and our State Department not to cross the border to go into Ukraine. Very important. They did that before they removed any American civilians out of Ukraine. Thousands of them. And so now you have all these American citizens stuck in Ukraine. Russia invades with shooting ballistic missiles, artillery, tanks, troop movements very rapidly to seize the capital city, Kiev, while Americans are still there. And so when Sarah Verordo called me, I talked to Sea Spray, our teammate. We had him. He was in Ukraine about a week before that they crossed the border. Our primary thing was Americans are going to be left here because our U.S. military and our intelligence agencies and our State Department is not going to be present, and they're not going to be allowed by the White House to help. So we have to go there and be able to move those Americans out in this massive evacuation, chaotic evacuation. That's why we stepped in.
Okay. So I want to kind of keep that momentum going, but you did mention Sea Spray there. And I wanted to ask you about Sea Spray because he was a prominent person in the Afghanistan conflict, getting folks out, with Save Our Allies. I guess, is the public ever going to know who Sea Spray is? Why is he so good and uniquely suited to do what he does? What exactly does he do? Like, tell us a little bit more about Sea Spray, because I rubbed elbows with him at an event that I won't name because, it was one of those things where you weren't supposed to know that he was there, but, got to meet him. It was the same time I think you and I met for the first time. But like, what is it about him that's so unique to where he's the guy on the ground before anyone else is?
Well, he's become one of my best friends, and likely no one probably will ever find out who he is, and that's just by his choice, and I think it's important for what he's chosen to do and commit himself to. I can tell you he was a Green Beret, Oxford educated, and then ended up going to the CIA, part of Ground Branch, Maritime Branch, became a precision rescue operative, as a paramilitary officer, became a precision rescue operative, and probably one of the most qualified people in the world when it comes to rescuing people from places like Ukraine and Afghanistan. And one of the unique things about who he is he chose to walk away from that career because of this administration saying we couldn't be involved in some of these things. Like I said, it was a choice, right? Can the U.S. government do it? They can, they won't. And so that creates a conflict of interest from someone that's employed by, like, by the person that Seaspray was employed by. And he had to make a choice. Do I stay in this career and be hamstrung to not help people that need help? Or do I resign from the career I worked my whole life for to help people that are not from a country of my own, that I've never met before, and that I'm going to, be willing to lay my life down for every single day. And I watched him choose to trade that career for innocent human life that he didn't know. And during the time that happened, I mean, this is a guy that in 10 days in HKIA for the Afghan evacs lost 37 pounds in 10 days. Wouldn't even drink a bottle of water to go out and grab little kids. He chose to stay. And I mean, in Ukraine, there's times that I have to reel him in all the time because he's out running around by himself. And he's all over the world doing this stuff. And, I get a lot of credit for this stuff, but the truth is, man, he's my hero. He's the one that I'm trying to keep up with. When I go overseas and do this stuff, he's the guy that I'm sitting in the car with. He and I are running around, and I'm leaning on him and trusting him. And when I'm back here in Texas and getting to do media and getting some of the credit for this stuff and I've gotten awards and stuff like that, I'm like, man, I'm accepting this for him and for other guys like him that I never get to talk about and their face never gets to be seen. That's why I'm able to do this stuff, because of guys like him. And he of all the guys I work with, he is the most impactful one. He's an incredible, absolutely incredible human being and a gift to our nation and the people around the world. And probably one of the most selfless guys I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, the consummate quiet professional is how he seems to come off. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more specifically about Ukraine, because I know you and I talked about this while you were writing the book, and you address this right from the author's note. So you even have a quote in there in the author's note: "Why do I choose to get involved in a war tainted by so much corruption?" Because the moment people see, especially people that are on the right, the moment people see the cover of the book and they see the Ukraine flag, obviously the last time they saw the Ukraine flag was probably in the Twitter profile or X profile of some politician that they don't like very much. And so there's obviously a lot of negativity. And again, from me as well, at the amount of money that I am giving to that country so that they can fight our proxy war and do all these different things. And when you see these people in high positions in Ukraine driving around in brand new Bentleys, and when you see, clubs in Kiev, when you see these clubs that are popping, and you see all these restaurants that are popping up, and you see all these different things, and then you got Vladimir Zelensky walking around like always in military green, like you're not actually going around. You're not patting. What are you doing wearing that stuff? Like, wear a suit and tie like a normal politician. But Chad, you've gotten the guff, and you've gotten so much crap for this because everyone understood the Afghanistan thing, but the Ukraine thing just feels different and has a lot to do with the amount of money and stuff that we've put in that direction. So how do you address the people that are like just mad that y'all are even there to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, I addressed it in the author's note because I thought it was super important. I didn't want to make the book about that. So I knew right from the beginning I wanted to put in the author's note, because I've gotten the emails, I've gotten the phone calls, and I hear them. And right, by the way, like, I agree with you. I'm right there with you. Like, I don't agree with the hundreds of millions of dollars of my tax money going to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Going to Ukraine. And it goes back to the beginning, Joe Biden allowing the Russians to go across that border. And why do you do that? My personal belief, and you always follow the money. That war has created one of the most profitable money laundering schemes in our lifetime.
Yep.
Hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, the money has no congressional oversight. We know it's not making it to the front lines. We know it's not. The cash is not making the front lines. I've had to bring something as simple as tourniquets to the front lines to give troops, because they can't even get tourniquets, much less training how to use it. They can't get chest seals for gunshot wounds. They're dying on the front lines without this money. While guys are like I said, riding around in Bentleys and stuff like that. So there is massive corruption there. I believe a lot of that money goes to Ukraine and makes a U-turn and comes back to the pockets of DC. The money that is getting spent, and they'll say, "Whoa, look, man, we're getting them javelins, and they're shooting javelins, and they're blowing up Russian tanks with javelins." Of course, that money's getting spent on that, because every javelin they shoot is another one they have to make, and the military industrial complex is making tons. So yeah, they're using the ordnance we're sending them, because the more they use, the more they spend. It's just business, right? It's how businesses work. And so the military industrial complex and the neocons in Washington, D.C. love nothing more than to keep that money going to Ukraine and keeping that ordnance going to Ukraine, and they're making, a lot of people are making tons of money. Meanwhile, you've never heard Joe Biden, you never heard Zelensky talk about peace, and Zelensky is a paid actor. People forget who he was. He comes up in that green T-shirt and standing on the front lines. And I remember when he first came out, people were like, "Oh my gosh, like this guy's so cool." Like he's like, you probably, most people had that reaction. Like, this guy's so cool. It's like Patton, right? The dude's a actor and a comedian who by the way, did theater, LG, like drag queen cross-dressing theater. He played a part in a movie of a comedian who became president of Ukraine. He was appointed, he was put in power to be the president of Ukraine by Obama and Biden, and Trump ruined their money laundering scheme when he came in for 4 years. And as soon as Biden got back in office, he allowed this to happen, and they're making a lot of money off of it. That's the truth. And so I've gotten a lot of that heat, and people have asked me, "Why are you supporting Zelensky? We don't agree with sending the hundreds of billions of dollars there." And I said, "I don't either. Zelensky's corrupt." Yeah, of course he is. And so is politicians in Washington, D.C. And I'm not there to help Biden. I'm not there to help Zelensky. What I went to Ukraine for was to help people. The consequence of this corruption, the consequence of this, all these evil people and evil politicians making these decisions, the consequence has been 1 million deaths, and mostly innocent civilians. 1 million deaths. That's not on the news much. And so for me, if I'm going to let my politics get in the way of my compassion for people, and if any of us let our politics get in the way of our compassion for people, we should change our politics, right? We should never become so jaded by these politicians and evil people that when we have the opportunity to help people in need, that we're going to say, "I'm not helping them. I don't care." I've seen Christian conservative people be like, "F those people in Ukraine." Man, like, I can't imagine as a Christian person, as a conservative, saying "F those people." Like, I've been to places like Kharkiv and Izum. And in Izum, I went and personally eyewitnessed, by request of our Central Intelligence Agency, I went personally eyewitnessed a great mass grave of 1,400 people that were all women and children, hands behind their back, shot behind the head. The Russians tried to burn their bodies, kill that, to get rid of the evidence. I've seen apartment buildings there, just women and children leveled like rubble from ballistic missiles the size of telephone poles, airdrops from MiGs hitting airstrikes on residential buildings, on elderly communities, no military targets in sight. That is a consequence of evil politicians in Washington, D.C., in Ukraine, and by the way, in Russia too, where they don't get a free pass, right? Putin's evil. All these people come together in this war, and if God opens up the door for me to have the opportunity to go help, I shouldn't help. Man, I can't hear it. Like, you cannot support me and not donate. I don't care. I'll go out there, bootstrap it with whatever I could, get out there with, but I'm going to help these people that have the opportunity to help.
Hey guys, real quick. Here recently, one of my family members was telling me about how they partnered with another family and they bought some beef from this local cattle producer. And when they got the beef, it was unbelievably terrible. And I can tell you this from experience because they made me some beef ribs from that animal and they were terrible. And they even gave me some steaks and some ground, and it was basically inedible. I couldn't believe how bad it was. And they ended up finding out that the person killed an old bull or something like that, and just the meat was old and tough and awful. And that's just what happens when you don't have a quality cattle operation that you can trust to give you a quality beef product on the back end. And that's, guys, why I want to introduce you to the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, my friends at Primal Beef. So Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that has partnered with Jocko Willing to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from some of these other cattle operations where you're going to end up getting bad beef? This operation is all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no mRNA ever, no vaccines ever. And after slaughter, this is a big deal. The beef is dry aged, and then it's hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another great thing about it. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride knowing that your purchase will help to put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. If you're not salivating yet, It's probably because you're a communist. Don't be a communist. Try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle, that's my first name, to get 10% off of your order. The great thing about that promo code is you can stack that on other deals as well and get all this money off. Again, that's primalbeef.com, promo code Kyle, that's Kyle, to get 10% off your order. Now, Chad, some people might be wondering, wait a minute, I'm watching this on YouTube right now. Chad looks to be in a different room in a different t-shirt. You know, we do an ad and then all of a sudden Chad is in a different place. Chad, I think we're under spiritual attack right now. And, or it's the Russians or, you know, the commies somewhere on this world don't want this interview to happen, because last week when we did the first part of this interview, the internet didn't just go down in my house. The internet went out in the entire neighborhood and it was down for like the whole day.
Deep state.
It is the deep state. But because even this morning, you can't get the Wi-Fi to work. You're having to record this on your phone now. What, like, who exactly have you pissed off, Chad? And why won't they just let us have a conversation?
Everyone. I pissed off everyone. I mean, yeah, man. State Department doesn't like me. White House doesn't like me. The Russians definitely don't like me. Like, there's a lot of people that don't like me. But but we still got to get the message out. So.
Still got to get the message out.
Thanks for locking arms with me to do it.
Hey, heck yeah. Well, I do want to kind of pick up where you left off with your last answer. You went on a very good rant, but there was one little thing in there that you just kind of dropped in, and it's the reality of what's happening on the ground, Chad. And the thing is in our modern news cycle, because again, like, look, you know, the leading presidential candidate, Donald Trump, was shot in the head, and then it was like basically out of the news cycle in a week because other stuff had happened. And so we're not hearing a lot about what's happening on the ground. Americans have become, you know, very inundated with bad news from around the world. And so we just don't want more bad news. But, you know, there are things that I've heard about Russian special operations snipers targeting aid workers, humanitarian aid workers in Ukraine, that there are Russian kill squads going around into civilian communities and executing everyone. You know, the Ukrainian men are out and fighting, but, you know, women, children, elderly, people being put in mass graves. These are things, well, I guess, confirm for me or deny the things that are actually going on there, the actual atrocities that you saw and that you know are still going on there.
Yeah, and we'll lay some of them out, but I'll say that the reason the mainstream media won't report these things is not because of anything other than the fact that if these things were reported, if the world knew the atrocities that were going on, the war crimes that were going on, well, then someone would have to do something about it, right? And if someone did something about it, then that would make this war end. And if this war ended, a lot of people would lose a lot of money. Politicians would lose a lot of money. Politicians in Ukraine, politicians in the United States, the neocons in Washington, D.C. that are part of the military-industrial complex that are making billions of dollars off of this would lose money. So the message has been to the mainstream media, do not report this stuff. Because if you report this stuff, right, someone's going to have to do something about it. This is going to have to end. Why do they laugh at Donald Trump when he says they can end this in 24 hours? Because they don't want him to end this in 24 hours. Zelensky doesn't want President Trump in office because the money stops coming when the war ends. Putin, of all people, and I'm certainly not a fan of Putin and certainly not endorsing him, but Putin here's President Trump say, I can end this in 24 hours, and Putin gets in it says, hey, candidate Trump is saying that he wants to end this in this thing. He's seen his proposals, but I want to hear what he has to say. Because so the two people that you would think are, you know, the warmongering Donald Trump, which everybody said for 9 years, that wants to bring peace, and the evil, guy who thinks the Soviet Union still exists, that wants to take over Ukraine. Those are the ones talking about peace. You don't hear Biden talking about peace. You don't hear Zelensky talking about peace. They don't want peace. And so when you see these things that should be in the media that aren't, that's the reason why. And I firsthand, this is not theory, this is not my opinion, firsthand, me on the ground in Ukraine, 2 hours past Russian lines, have seen these war crimes. I've seen the apartment buildings where only women and children live, hit by airstrikes, and not indiscriminately, not accidental, not casualties of war, not collateral damage, consistent precise airstrikes in multiple buildings that hit the same spot, knocking down a fifth floor building to the ground, cutting it in half, where playgrounds are, where only women and children live. I've been in the elderly communities, just like we have elderly communities 60 plus communities in America. They have those there. No military targets, level to the ground, rubble. Pizza parlors, ice cream shops, schools, hospitals, level to the ground, being hit with ballistic missiles the size of telephone poles. I personally have carried out a bag, and given it to members of our government to bring evidence out of chemical weapons being used in 6 different locations against civilians, and knowing that those chemicals came back as positive. And I've witnessed mass graves. I went for our government as a surrogate, not in official capacity of government, but for our government to report back on mass graves in places like Izum, where we were there, witnessed a mass grave of about 1,400 people, 2 mass graves, I'm sorry, of about 1,400 people total, all women and children. These are war crimes, and these war crimes require action from the White House. They require action from NATO, and those war crimes give justification for NATO to come in, led by the President of the United States, because we are the leader of the free world, if people forgot, led by a strong leader to come in and say, hey, we're not going in to fight. We're not sending troops in to fight. We're going to call a humanitarian ceasefire because of war crimes, and we're going to go in and we're going to provide humanitarian aid for the civilians of Ukraine. That, Kyle, would do what President Trump talks about. That would end it in 24 hours, because as a NATO coalition went in to provide, not to fight the Russians, but to provide humanitarian aid to innocent civilians based on war crimes, then Putin would have to draw a line in the sand somewhere and say, we're not going to use military action right now, because we would, by doing that, we would violate Article 5 of NATO, and that would require military force against us. So Putin would not do that. So that would end somewhere in the Ukraine, eastern front of Ukraine. There would be a line drawn, and Russia would be on one side, Ukraine would be another, humanitarian effort to bring peace. And look, that would end it in 24 hours. That's why these things aren't being reported. And
okay, I have a question about that, Chad, because at the tail end of every law is a gun. And so people are like, no, there's not. It's like, well, yeah, if you get pulled over for speeding and you refuse to give your ID and you refuse to comply with the police officer, you refuse to, leave your vehicle, like at the end of that is the threat of violence from that cop, and it would be justified violence. So my question here would be like, okay, how enforceable would a humanitarian ceasefire actually be? Like, what would Putin have to do to just be like, yeah, I'm just going to ignore that. I'm going to call your bluff, NATO, that you're actually going to try and do this. And I guess my next question, I was going to ask this towards the end, but I'll just ask it now, is at what point do we think Putin might just say, screw it, and go nuclear in this conflict? Not nuclear to the point of mutually assured destruction, but a little bit, if you can say it this way, more of a kind of directed nuclear attacks, basically saying, NATO, if you want this is the type of war that you would be entering. So I'm your huckleberry if you want to F around and find out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, sure. There's always that risk. Putin has proven to be a very evil person, aggressive person. But I don't think he's stupid. That would be one. It would be political suicide, and the Russian people would not be behind that. Not only because they might not agree with it, because they don't want to. They don't want to be a target of a NATO invasion, or a NATO coming in and taking control of that country, or a nuclear war. And two, it would be suicide in the fact that Russia doesn't have the capability of taking Ukraine right now. How would they have the capability of taking over, of withstanding a war from the entire world, NATO? So yeah, certainly any bully could say, I'll call your bluff and I'll swing back. But the reality is, for anyone to look at this strategically, the reality is Russia does not have the capability to stand against a NATO force, and Putin knows that. Now, Putin has the option to save face, right? They would somewhere along the eastern front of the Ukraine-Russian border, would a line would fall, and wherever that line would fall, and more than likely, Russia would probably determine where that line was. Right or not, they would probably determine where that line is, and things would stop. That's my assessment. I mean, anytime you stand up against someone, right? That you're right. There's a chance of the repercussions of that. But that's where courageous leadership comes in. I mean, or you could sit back and do nothing, and allow Russia to take Ukraine, and allow them to take whatever's next. because it doesn't stop there, right? This is we know this. It doesn't stop there, and the truth is, as a and a lot of Americans don't agree with this, by the way, but as the leader of the free world, as the shining light on the hill, we do have I believe in America first. I believe our national security is first. I believe that we need to be a strong nation in order to be able to help other people. But as America, we cannot allow, especially as part of NATO, we cannot allow these atrocities to happen at the level they're happening. There is no greater atrocity to humankind than what's happening in our current world than what's happening in Ukraine right now. It's not being reported. Like over 1 million people have been killed. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff. I mean, Burma, like there's genocides all over the world, all over Africa. But we're not talking about tribal warfare. We're not talking about third world countries. We're talking about first world superpower coming in with ballistic missiles the size of telephone poles being fired into the side of apartment buildings, hospitals, schools. That's the reality of what's happening. This is an atrocity that our world should never allow, because if it's allowed, like anything else, then it continues. And so this is different. The news hasn't reported this. This is different. This is a whole different level. And by the way, it's being funded and being enabled by U.S. taxpayer dollars. And that's a hard thing for me to say as an American, because I love our country. But it's the truth. And I love our country enough to call it out. And we're not the good guys in this. And when you talk about civilian casualties, when the governments of the world, and by the way, we're sending money and stuff like that, but the governments of the world are not there doing the right thing. They're not there helping, and for the obvious reasons talked about with NATO and Article 5 and stuff like that. They're not there helping. Who's there helping are the NGOs, the non-government organizations, the nonprofits that are there helping. I ran into a German group of medical folks who went there as the NGO. They're providing medical care for anyone that needed it. It could have even been Russians. They were providing medical care for anyone. They had this bus. It was blue and yellow bus. I have some pictures of it. And it was just, they were set up so good. We asked them, hey, can we get in and look at what you guys are doing? Videoed it, we mimicked one of our medical assets off of theirs. Just incredible people. And they had been going around for about 3 months, and these people were just such great people. And the Russians fired a rocket in the side of it and killed all those people. Why'd they kill them? Because they're there helping. These kind of things are not okay. Medical aid in combat, especially when they're willing to treat both sides, they should have some kind of protection from both sides. And that's not the case right now. If you're providing any aid, you're a target to the Russians there, and they've attacked a lot of NGOs.
Now, I remember you speaking about in the book that, many of these NGOs, these are from the Christian community. There was not a single government that was represented there. And so that's kind of indicative of what happens when push comes to shove. Who are the people that show up? I even had the thought way back when Christianity was still in its early days, like first, second century, when the Romans would put babies out for exposure and the Christians would come in and, that was basically first century abortion, but they would come in and scoop these babies up and raise them as their own. When there was plague and different things going on in different places during the Roman Empire, throughout the Roman Empire, the Christians were the ones going in and actually caring for people. And so that's an interesting note here. But, obviously, Chad, you see the atrocities, you see the horrible things, but then you even see the kind of like the small atrocities. I remember a very poignant and very emotional moment during the book where you were like, I think you were at a train station and you're watching fathers walk their families to the train station, wife and children, and then say goodbye. And then they're walking back alone and they know where they're walking towards. Like they're walking back into war. They're walking potentially to their deaths. And so this is desolation. This is depravity. Like this is war. And again, I think if you've only seen war in movies and video games, it's kind of easy to romanticize it until you talk to someone that's actually been there, that's actually smelled the rotting bodies and seen the mass graves and things. It's a much different experience. And then so for you, Chad, as a father and as a veteran, you can seemingly insulate the rest of your family from that. Whenever you were doing the Afghanistan thing, your oldest son, Hunter, who was, I think he was a former Marine at that point. I know there's technically no such thing, but he was a retired Marine, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But he didn't go to, he wasn't able to go with you guys to Afghanistan. That was a difficult and a disappointing thing for him. But
he was an Afghanistan veteran too. So he's an Afghanistan veteran wanting to do the evacs, and I benched him, so.
Yes. And, I'll be talking to your son specifically about that and kind of how that all went down. But y'all decided pretty early on with this conflict in Ukraine that one of the biggest and best things that y'all could do beyond bottles of water and, evacs was building a communication network. And you wanted to get that fully executed. And I want to read a quote from the book here. There was only one real solution to our problem, and that was to have someone to buy the gear in the U.S. and bring it over to Poland in person. And there was only one person I could think of who I trusted to tackle a task like that in such short time frame, my eldest son, Hunter Robichaux. And so, enter Hunter. This is kind of his moment, but this is a difficult task. He was up to it, but this was a difficult task, being able to find all of the gear that y'all were going to need to set up this communication network. But one of the biggest potential assets to you and your team was your eldest son. I mean, there's a lot of dynamics there, Chad. So just kind of take us through that a little bit. And Chad, I literally just set up the question in the most perfect way that I could think to set it up. And then the Ruskies and maybe the Russians and Koreans, the Iranians and the North Koreans and all them, maybe they hate us as well, because we ran into even more tech snafu. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're getting quite the visual array of experiences, because we went from the most high def setup we could have to you recording it on your phone via Riverside to now we're on Zoom. And so if it sounds different, that's a Zoom thing. If it looks different, that's a Zoom thing. But the question I asked,
deep state, man, deep state.
It's the deep state. Yeah, it's all of them just wrapped into one evil package. So we talked about the atrocities that you saw. We talked about, the things that you saw, just the personal issues. But now your son is part of the mission. He wasn't part of the Afghanistan mission, which was super disappointing, but now he's part of this mission. Just talk to me a little bit about what that's like, as a father and as an operator, and then we'll get into a really interesting story about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, when Sea Spray and I are out there, we're putting this comms package together, and I said, you said it from the book, the only person I knew that I trusted with this was Hunter. I mean, one, he really wanted to come, but also his experience as a Marine was as an Anglican Marine, which is, those that don't know, Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company. They do all the JTAC, calling in airstrikes, calling in artillery, calling in naval gunfire. He did that in Afghanistan. He's kind of like a tech nerd when it comes to comms equipment, super smart on this stuff. And so we had to buy not just some comms equipment, $300,000+ worth of comms equipment really quickly. You can't go to one store. You got to go all over the country and then get it by himself to Poland. And so he did that, and he showed up. He pulled it off. He gets there with all the equipment, and then we're looking at, I think he had over a dozen bags of stuff that he carried out by himself because we didn't even go help him. He shows up, and Sea Spray's like, okay, who's going to set this stuff up? And he's like, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And he spends the next 3 nights, not even sleeping, just setting our equipment up, building our TOC, our Tactical Operations Center, where you could have this equipment monitored and tracked as it gets distributed to Ukraine. You can see it on the big screens and as it's moving around. And so he set all this up. And so when he came on our team, and Sea Spray, by the way, Sea Spray says, okay, look, because we're calling FedEx because he brought that stuff over, and he's like, he's not FedEx anymore. He's not the FedEx guy anymore. He built this, and we need him. Yeah. And so he, there's nepotism and stuff, right? You bring in, how's a guy like him, 27 years old, Anglican Marine with one deployment to Afghanistan, get on a team like this with CIA ground branch guys, Delta Force guys, Dev Group guys. How's he get in there? Man, he earned his way there. He came, showed up, did the job, earned his way there. Sea Spray was the one that was like, hey, he has to stay. And so that's how he got on. And man, it went from him being there, running the TOC, to these operations coming up, and me really facing this really difficult choice. And this choice was, do I, as a leader, take one of our most critical assets, which is Hunter, he's proven to be a critical asset, across the border in Ukraine? Or do I, as a father, say, hey, I'm going to keep you on this side of the border where it's safe because I want to protect you and control you? And that's a real dilemma for me. And really what the book's more about than anything else is that, right? Me as a father dealing with the fear that a parent has to protect their son, the control that you have as a parent to protect those you love, and really coming to this determination that as much as I love Hunter, as much as I love my son, that God loves him more. And as much as I can protect my son, God can protect him more. And as much as I want to control the situation, God had burdened his heart the same way he burdened my heart to go help those innocent people. And who was I to stop that? just because I was his dad. And the reality of all of it came to the realization that as dangerous as it was, because look, there's a time, if you're reading the book, the prologue, like we're 2 hours behind Russian lines. Hunter's in Bakhmut leading an operation. He's getting bombed by indirect fire at the same time. And I'm in a Zoom 2 hours away, and Seaspray and I are getting hit by indirect fire, like within 100 yards of us, dirt flying on us, like that kind of indirect fire. Like we're father, son, 2 hours apart on a radio, hearing each other getting bombed. Like, how do you get to there? And it was this realization to allow that. And I say allow that because I was in charge, right? There's realization that the safest place for my son to be, safer than in a war zone in Ukraine, or safer than in on his couch in Texas, the safest place for my son to be is in God's will. And whatever the results of that may be, and that's a hard thing to say as a dad, but whatever the results of that may be. And I had to come to that realization. And so writing this book, Kyle, like is really more than anything else the testimony of me making that transition in my life, because I'm very controlling. When I get fearful or something, I take total control of it, especially when it comes to those I love. And just relinquishing that control, relinquishing that fear, to trusting both God and trusting my son, and allowing him to be, where God's burdened his heart to be, and that's in the will of God. And that's what this book's about more than anything. And that's a hard thing, but that's what happened.
Yeah, I would say that's the main theme. And I mean, really, that's the subtitle, why a father and son risked it all for the people of Ukraine. And so your relationship with Christ, but also like your father-son relationship, that's a dynamic. I mean, you talk about in the book, it's a great story. You got to pick up the book to get it. There's a great story about y'all rescuing this Fox News correspondent, like, and how you and Hunter were part of that, like all that's in the book. But also there was a checkpoint thing that came up where, basically you could have had it set up where Hunter didn't have to do any of the talking and didn't have to be, the cool as a cucumber guy, didn't have to have any of that risk, but you kind of talk through that scenario, and you don't just talk through it like an operator, you talk through it like a father, because above being an operator, you are a father, even though over there, it's like your priority was kind of being an operator. But it wasn't just you guys. It wasn't just your son. It wasn't just your team. There is actually, because kind of lost in all this is there are Ukrainians that are doing things that are pretty extreme to try and push back the darkness that we're seeing coming in from the Russians. And so I want to read this quote here. The Ukrainian church had formed their own underground network and were playing a vital role in getting the aid that the NGOs were providing across the country to the troops themselves. And some of the stories that you describe in the book, Chad, about these Ukrainian pastors, these dudes were gangsters. Like these were kind of like, I was reminded of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and him, being just this kind of theologian, kind of this wimpy theologian pastor guy. And then all of a sudden he turns into this gangster that's, part of a plot to kill Hitler, to end, the Third Reich and all these different things, and, to avoid war and the killing of the Jews and all that. So talk to me a little bit about these pastors and what you saw from them when you were there.
Yeah, one of the most epic moments that I had in my time, those 10 trips in Ukraine, I got to see all kinds of stuff. Some of the most kinetic combat I've seen in my life, 8 deployments to Afghanistan, has been in Ukraine. I mean, bodies everywhere. I mean, this is military on military, it's insane. But one of the most epic moments was sitting in a basement outside of Kiev with this pastor. And bombs are going off, and the air raid sirens are going off, and he wanted to be in the basement. I wanted to be upstairs, but I went to sit down with him, and we're talking, and I felt like I was in World War II. I felt like with the air raid sirens, it's cold, it's gray outside, the bombs are going off, and all the lights are out, and I'm sitting there and just having this conversation with this pastor, who chose to, by the way, who was also had his I don't know what status, but some sort of visa status to be in America. He was in America, chose to go back there. And a lot of people don't know. A lot of people fled Ukraine, but over 300,000 men, Ukrainian men, went back to Ukraine to go fight for their country. And a lot of pastors who were out doing missionary work around the world came back to Ukraine. This was one of them. He came back and he chose to be there. His wife and kids weren't there, but he was there. And I asked him, how do you think this again? He's like, we're going to win. And he's like, they will have to kill every single Ukrainian because we will fight till the end. And this is a pastor. This isn't a soldier. Guy probably never shot a gun in his life before. And he talked about, them going around as a church, moving street signs to lure Russian soldiers into ambush sites to kill them. This is a pastor. They're talking about this network that God helped this guy build relationships with military and government officials and to build this network. As much as I want to do, at this time as an NGO, as a former special operator, I have to have we call it in the special operations community and intelligence world, call it access and placement. You could be as good as you want to be at something, but if you don't have access to a geographical location to do that work, it doesn't matter how good you are at it, right? You have to be able to have access and placement to those locations. And so all these NGOs wanted to be able to get aid to the front line. They wanted to be able to get military support, training the troops, but everything was so chaotic that it was very difficult to have access and placement. And so the person or group of people that I believe God brought in to the mix and had orchestrated this for years prior to be able to pull off access and placement for NGOs like me was the church. This underground church had a network of people that knew each other, they trusted each other, and they were able to allow NGOs to have access and placement to be able to do the work they want to do. I mean, even something like as simple as getting fuel to the front lines. You couldn't get past the checkpoints unless you had access and placement. If I want to get tourniquets to the front lines, you can't get to the front lines to get to those troops without access and placement. If you want to get Bible sticks, if you want to go minister to them, if you want to do anything, be positioned to be able to rescue, you have to have access and placement. Access and placement for the NGO community came through the underground network of the churches and these pastors. And it was like to see that on the ground in the churches, underground, not underground, but underground, to see that firsthand. And like literally felt like I was in World War II, during the Nazi occupation of Eastern Europe. It was incredible, and these were some of the bravest, most selfless men that I ever seen. Take the politics aside, all of this. These people didn't care about the politics. They don't care about the whiskey. They care about their countrymen and their freedom and their farms and their family. That's what they care about, and they were willing to die for their neighbor. And some of them did. A lot of them did. They're willing to die for their neighbor to make sure that they fight to preserve their freedom. It was incredible.
Well, Chad, it reminded me of a recent discussion that you had with the great Eric Metaxas on your podcast, Resilient, where, you're talking a lot about his book, Letter to the American Church, and then his follow-up book, Religionless Christianity. And basically when he breaks down what would have happened if more German pastors would have pushed back against the rise of the Nazi party. And it's like, imagine these Ukrainian pastors right now, if they were just like, you know what, we're just going to do church and we're just going to be about the gospel. And then you have like literally people around them dying, starving, freezing. And it's just kind of like, no, we're not going to get into any social issues. We're not going to get into the culture war. We're not going to get into the war. We're going to be pacifistic. We're going to be all these different things. How much differently would this conflict look? Obviously it would look super different. So Chad, this next question is going to be the last question of the day before we have to do a fourth recording just to get this one podcast out for the love of all things holy. And the question is a serious one. It's, where is God in all of this conflict? Because you just got through talking about the pastors. You've talked about your personal faith, the faith of the people that are on your team. But there are a lot of Christians that have an attack of conscience whenever you're walking by a mass grave and you see newborn babies slaughtered, toddlers, innocent women, elderly women. You hear about the systematic rape of some of the people by the Russian soldiers. You hear about all these atrocities. And it's a fair question. How is God working here right now in all this depravity? How would you answer that? I mean, God, obviously, as a believer, God's always present. And the question always comes when stuff like this happens. And the question it always has surfaced for me in war is why do bad things happen to good people, right? Especially not just good people, innocent people, children. Why do bad things happen? First of all, I'd say these bad things are not done by God. That's the first thing. I think none of us would believe that God did these things, right? But could God stop these things? That's the real question, right? God that hung the universe and put the stars in the sky, like created life from nothing in each of us. Like, could he stop these things? And the answer is, yeah, of course he could. So if he could, why wouldn't he? Right? And that brings the really heavy question. And it is a matter of free will. If God would intervene. And I believe he does intervene, but intervene in a way that completely controls humanity, then we would not be who he created us to be. We would not be free will people. And in that free will comes evil, and evil people do evil things. And I think we look at things in this world as permanent. We don't look at things eternal, and when you look at things eternal, that starts to change your perspective. But the question still remains, why do bad things happen to good people? And the truth is, none of us are good. The Bible says none of us, not one of us, are good. We're born in a sinful nature, and that if there was only ever one
good person on this earth, it would have been Jesus. And he was born in a manger. He lived his life on the run. He was hunted down by his own people, rejected by his people, arrested, tortured, spit on, beaten, crucified, murdered. So if he's the one good person, right, bad things happen to him. Very bad things happen to him. And this world is that's an example of this world is an evil place and there's evil people. And where there's evil, good men and women. I use men. I don't want to leave out that, especially in Ukraine, because I've seen some amazing women go across that border to help. And so I always talk about men in combat. And I'm a very much believer, especially in the world I come from. It's a man's job. But in Ukraine, I've seen some amazing, brave women go out. So good men and women have stood up against this evil. And where I see God's hand come into this is just miraculous acts of providence, where God allows us to do things that are impossible. Why did what we do in Afghanistan work, where we rescued 17,000 people? I'm not smart enough to do that. I'm not logistically capable enough to do that. I'm not networked enough to do what happened. That was a orchestrated miracle by God himself that he allowed me to be part of. Why did we get to rescue these people we rescued in Ukraine? Man, the access to placement, the favor, those are things that were orchestrated way before we ever thought. I could have pointing to Ukraine on a map. Those were orchestrated by God himself, and I was brought into that. So all these things that we have done, these good things that we have done to help innocent people, were orchestrated by God. Me and Sea Spray got caught behind Russian lines, and literally with indirect fire hitting within 100 yards of us, MiG jets dropping airstrikes. I've never seen I've been all through Afghanistan. We own the air. I never seen a enemy jet fly over and drop air ordnance on anything. We were caught in the middle of that. And the Ukrainian troops we were with were fighting. Literally, I could hear the buffer springs on their weapons. I could smell gunfire. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like the most kinetic thing I've ever seen. I stopped counting after about 80 Russian troops that I stepped over. I was actually counting them at first. I stopped counting as we were passing them. And I mean, in the midst of that, I didn't see one Ukrainian soldier get hit, and it was a miracle. It was a miracle moment. It was a miracle moment that Sea Spray and I made it out of there. It was a miracle moment that my son, who was 2 hours away, made it out of there. And so, in the midst of this, all this evil and all this chaos, and God hasn't allowed everyone to be spared, certainly. But I personally have witnessed God do miraculous things to allow us to do the work that we do, and I can't deny that.
Chad, it's what you said a little bit earlier. Having an eternal perspective helps, because, on this earth, if you don't believe in cosmic justice, you have to get your justice on this earth. And so you're going to try to create justice, but you have to know that there is a time coming where every tear that's ever been shed, it'll be as if it was never shed. And it's like, that is such a powerful thought for us to kind of rest in. Now, Chad, at the beginning of this episode, I said, how cool is it that you've been on here 4 times? Technically now, though, you've been on 8 times because of just trying to get this one freaking interview done. But Chad, we have made it to the finish line. That's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No. I know I got tons of sponsors representing Smith & Wesson right now, but look, I got to point this out. Vortex showed up too, because they're holding my camera up right now. Get the Vortex.
Hey,
this is actually
shout out to Vortex.
It's a Vortex range out there. It's actually for Sean Ryan. We're gonna Vortex sends to him. He and I are going out, and another thing you get left out on, but we're going out at the Vortex. Vortex is shooting these new optics and rangefinder for Vortex. So that's gonna be a pretty cool trip. I got some Vortex. I got some Vortex and Smith & Wesson coming to you. I told them we left you out, and so we're gonna get you hooked up.
Look, Chad, I've lived most of my life as a literal redheaded stepchild, but I've never felt less appreciated than I have by you over the last few months. But hey, we're coming full circle. All kidding aside, Chad, we need more guys out there like you and like Hunter. I'm so glad that you guys are out there, that Save Our Allies is still working, that you got the Sarah Verardos of the world that are doing what they can to push back darkness. But man, and keep writing books, keep doing awesome stuff, and we'll keep having you on. So we'll see you next time, Chad.
Thank you, brother.
All right, guys, thanks so much for staying with us throughout that entire episode. I appreciate it. Again, sorry about all the tech snafus, but it just is what it is. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got a link to the Save Our Allies website, the Mighty Oaks Foundation website. I've got a link to Chad's Instagram and a link to where you can buy your copy of A Mission Without Borders. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@undaunted.life. That's info@undaunted.life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.undaunted.life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.